Okay, hopefully everybody's in by now at this point. So my name is Gary with FoxTale Book Shoppe. Welcome to the Family Story Workbook presentation workshop where we have in partnership with Broadleaf Writers Association. And we have some talented authors tonight that are going to speak on different subjects. You'll get to know them and hopefully find a new author you'd like to follow. If you'd like to purchase any of their books, FoxTale Book Shoppe is a local independent bookstore in Metro Atlanta area. And we have an online store, or we also are open for in-person or curbside shopping as well. We'd appreciate the support. So if you do plan to buy one of their books or all of their books, we would love if you would consider FoxTale for that. So I'm going to turn it over to Zachary Steele with Broadleaf Writers Association to kick the program started. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so happy for you guys to be joining us on this very first Not 2020 program that we have this year. I'm always glad to be able to bring programming to everybody out there, and equally excited for this particular one because I've been working for a while to get an event with Kris going, and with this particular one, I'm really excited about it because I'm a big fan of storytelling, obviously, and equally love family stories and family history. So we're going to go ahead and get things rolling here. And Kris, just to give you a little bit of a bio on her, and I've known Kris for a long time through the James River Writers in Richmond, Virginia. And she is, so I guess she started with podcasts running the Words You Should Know in Grammartopia. I do remember the things you would do, like this word and that word kind of thing. But Get a Grip on Your Grammar was the first one, correct? And then you followed that up with the Novel Editing Workbook, both very excellent books and excellent resources for writers. I highly recommend them, and also highly recommend any workshop you may be able to find from Kris on editing, including the one we had at the conference last year, which was a big favorite. So thrilled to have you, Kris. Kris Spisak is your last name, as I always like to try to make sure I get that right. And thrilled to have you, and I am going to hand the baton to you, and let's get things rolling.
Fabulous. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Broadleaf. Thank you, FoxTale. Thank you for being here, everyone, with us tonight. It's really funny for me because I've been a writer for a long time. I've been an editor for a long time. And I had a book coming out in 2020 during a pandemic. And what does one do when one has a book coming out in a pandemic? How does one share this idea with the world? So what I have going on now, I've called it the Story Stop Tour, and I have been so honored that it has been taking off, and we have been partnering with amazing writing organizations like Broadleaf, with amazing indie bookstores like FoxTale across the country. And this project, this book, the Family Story Workbook, because I have to give a shameless plug, is not about me. It's not about my family story. It's about the fact that in this moment in history, especially, we all have stories to share. We all have stories to preserve before they're lost, whether they're our own or whether they're our relatives. We all need ways to connect with people besides through the screens. We need to find those special, intimate conversations. And this little book tour that I was trying to scheme, because if you know me, I am a schemer, I am a dreamer, but this book tour went so much beyond me because there are so many people who have stories, and there's so many wonderful writing communities that have stories. To give you a little bit of background on me, as Zach said, I'm an editor. I geek out over words. I have a writing tip blog that I think just shared blog number 417 this week. It's been going for a really long time. And yes, I have a podcast. I geek out over language, or the fact that, I don't know, the word posh has a history story in that when people would take take a cruise or take a boat across the ocean, it was the posh thing to do was to go port out starboard home, P-O-S-H. I remember being a little kid and discovering these little etymology stories like this that absolutely fascinated me. And I started tumbling into this language. But I was also the kid who was sitting there completely fascinated when I was listening to the stories of my grandparents. My grandparents on my maternal side are Ukrainian. And through the course of World War II, they had just gotten married. They had both lost each other and both assumed that the other one was dead. And they were both in displaced persons camps after the war in Austria. And both of them, they assumed that they lost the other one. My grandmother had made friends with this woman who had a sweetheart in another camp, and they were writing letters back and forth. My grandfather had made friends with a man with a sweetheart in another camp, and they were writing letters back and forth. And in this way, my grandparents, who had not seen each other for years and both presumed the other one to be dead, were reconnected because of these letters of these friends in this displaced persons camp. We all have amazing stories and we need to write them down, because if we don't record them, video them, something, these stories will be lost. And this is where this idea came from. This particular project's journey has been fascinating because, again, in especially the COVID era, storytelling, which is always so powerful, can mean so much to all of us. And today I am honored to be here with a panel of 4 amazingly talented writers. And Zach, I'm completely including you in this bunch. So don't just wear your broadleaf hat. You're in the author camp here too. And each of you, if you could take a moment to just introduce yourself, turn on your videos for just a moment as we're getting rolling here, and say a little bit about what you write, the stories you love, absolutely anything. And let's see, Zach, I'm going to end with you. So let's see, Bernette, Vanessa, Ricki, hop on. Bernette was the first one to pop onto her screen. Bernette, welcome.
This is why you never sit at the front of the class, Bernette.
No, I was that kid though, all the time. Front row all the time. Thank you so much, Kris. And I am excited about this evening. Thanks for having and creating this space. So I'm Bernette Sherman, the messenger. And I use my gifts as a spirit medium and a writer. And so they kind of work together. And I've written across a lot of different genres. My first time writing a family story is actually a historical fiction book that's behind me, and it's coming out next month, but it's based on and inspired by a family story, which is really cool, because this is all about family stories. And you know, it's interesting because we all have family stories that sometimes we don't even know are interesting until you start digging into the stories in the background. So I thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel and talk. Again, I'm Bernette Sherman, the messenger.
Thank you, Bernette. Ricki, you popped up next for me. So you're next up. Don't you love you
Okay.
have no idea where you are on my screen.
I know I'm in the middle of mine, but I guess that's, you know, the world does not revolve around me. But anyway, I'm Ricki Cardenas. I too am an editor. That's kind of when you were talking about geeking out about the etymology of words and everything. That's kind of my thing. But I'm also a junior high English teacher. So I like to impart that geekiness to my students and try to get them to love these things that they might think are kind of boring. I try to make grammar fun. And I usually try to do all that with humor. So, I mean, my books, while I do teach some Shakespeare, my books are not Shakespeare. I have 2 and I have them here, but Mr. Right Swipe, this is sort of like Bridget Jones in the time of Tinder. And then Switch and Bait, which is sort of like Cyrano de Bergerac in the time of Tinder. So
Love it.
So there's that, but and you know, whenever I write something, I think there's a lot of me in it, whether it isn't necessarily something that actually happened to me, but one of the things that I suppose we'll be talking about here tonight about family stories and all of that is just getting authenticity. Like, I think, you know, that's one of the most important things of when I'm thinking back, or even when, you know, I listen to all your stories or read something, I'm trying to say, you're trying to connect with it, like you were saying, trying to connect and so that it feels authentic. And I guess I should say also that I just had a short story published in it's an anthology of Georgia writers, and it's called Viral Literature Alone Together in Georgia. So this is kind of like what we're doing. It's sort of in the style of the Decameron, where it's a bunch of authors talking about their experiences with, not with COVID, but with quarantine times. So, and my story in there, Corona Care Package, is a little bit sort of a what could have happened when I met my husband, but not really. Sort of alternate history. But yeah, I think that's it for me. I don't know. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm excited to hear, you know, all of your stories and how you kind of use them with your own writing. So thanks.
Thank you, Ricki. And Vanessa, if you could introduce yourself.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Vanessa Fortenberry, and by trade, I'm a music teacher turned teacher librarian. My passion is music, and you can imagine my other passion is reading, and then let's add writing to the equation as well. So my first story that I wrote was a book that was inspired by my grandson when he said to his mother, "Mama, I want to see God." And when she shared that with me one night, I woke up the next morning and I wrote the story. However, it came out in rhyme. And that is not exactly how I intended it for it to come out, but that's how it came out. That's how God, you know, gave it to me. So I ran with that. I did not intend on publishing it. It was just a poem as far as I was concerned, but I did carry it to my writing group and shared it with some other people, and they said, "Hey, you should get it published." And you know, so I did start working on it. And so Mama, I Want to See God is the first book. And about the same time, maybe after, just a little bit after this book came out, I was having a conversation with a friend who had come into town for a day, and we talked about the fact that possibly I should try to do a you know, not just one book, you know, let my publisher know I have more than one book in me. So we came up with the idea that we would bring the daddy into the equation. So Daddy, I Want to Know God is the second book. And the third book will include the grandparents, and it is scheduled to come out in October of this year. So I'm very excited about that book coming out. And I first met Kris with Mama, I Want to See God, because she wrote my press release. And then I reached out to her for the second book to write my press release. And she said, "Well, I'm not really doing it anymore," but you know, she agreed to do it for me. So I was so thankful to her. And I am so thankful and so happy to be a part of this event tonight. Thank you, Kris.
Thank you, Vanessa. So funny, the hats writers wear, absolutely. And Zach, okay, speaking of hats, take off Broadleaf executive director hat,
The
writer.
the Broadleaf hat has affected me in many ways, but no, obviously I'm not talking about Broadleaf now, but in addition to Broadleaf, I am a writer, and I do have a couple books that were published by a smaller press in a time very seemingly long ago at this point. But I have a new one coming out this year, The Weight of Ashes, which was scheduled for April, now been pushed for pandemic-related reasons to July. But I'm actually very excited about it having the summer release on that one. And I'm very excited about that particular book, about grief and loss and a young boy on a journey to cope with his brother's death. Then behind that, I have another one that I should have news on soon. That is a more young adult fantasy driven series, but I don't have anything finalized on that yet. So obviously I'm a lover of words. I am a lover of writers, and this is my world right here. So I'm very happy to be part of this conversation.
Thanks, Zach. Now we're just gonna dive in, everybody. And again, this is all about stories and what inspires us. And this is the fun part where I get to like put each of you in the spotlight. So you never know who I'm going to go to. And people who are here with us this evening, if anyone has questions, feel free to add them into the Q&A. We'll probably get to them kind of toward the end, but if you have that thought that you just don't want to forget, feel free to just add it in there, and we'll absolutely get there. Ricki, I'm going to start with you. Who is the best storyteller you know in your family? And maybe what's one of their best stories, and what is it about them that really makes you think they're such a great storyteller?
Well, the best stories I probably can't say because there's swear words in them, but I really wrestled with when I was thinking about this. But now I have to say my father, he's really one of these people, and he doesn't see himself this way at all, but he's kind of like the life of the party type guy. You know, he will talk about something and you really feel like you're there. You can see him totally reliving everything. So one little story, and he brings up a lot of things from, you know, like you picture in your mind sort of our gang comedies going on, you know, that kind of dates me a little bit, but you know, Little Rascals. But that's kind of what I picture what his childhood was like. And so one of the stories from his childhood, and it's not like the story that you told about your grandparents, and that's amazing. This story is not going to be like that. Like, none of his stories are really, you know, this was a profound, important thing, but it really tells you a lot about who he is. And, you know, with all of his stories, he's usually, you know, the protagonist, but he's not like the hero necessarily. And he's not trying to make himself that way, but that makes you like him. He makes himself a likable, I don't know, it's like reading a book. But anyway, when he was in, so we kind of make fun of him about this now, because so he has now, which this is very weird. I should have had a picture of it, but it's creepy. So he has this ventriloquist dummy of Jerry Mahoney, which the only reason I know who Jerry Mahoney is because he's always talked about how he had this ventriloquist dummy when he was, you know, in second, third grade. And he used to do like little shows with it. I don't know where he did this. Like, he didn't do this for people, but he would just play around with it. He had some kind of little act. And so, so when he was in the third grade, he had to do this. There was a talent show and he was like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. He had never really done it for anybody before, but he's like, yeah, I'm totally going to do this. So he said he just remembers. And, you know, when he tells the story, you can just feel the panic. But, you know, he said there was some kind of little act going on like the proscenium, and then the curtains open, and there he was sitting there with Jerry Mahoney, and he couldn't move. He just froze and he couldn't do anything. And he could hear his teacher going, Dickie, his name is Rick, but they called him Dickie, Dickie, move the head. And he just sat there and move his handkerchief. And he just like, he wanted to, but he just was stunned. And then the teacher had to take him off the stage. And so, you know, and I don't really think necessarily it was a thing where kids were laughing at him or whatever, but you know, just little stories like that, where it's not really supposed to be teaching you a lesson, but you just get a good idea of, I don't know, it just, like, for me, when I write stuff, it's more like a character study and that kind of thing. And all of his stories, they really like show me a lot about who he is. And I don't know, that's one of our favorite. And then plus he now, through the miracle of eBay, now he has a replica of the same one that he had. And it's so very creepy. And he has it in my parents' bedroom, just like, cause we think it's so weird. And he has it sitting there and he puts like a little hat on it, and it's very strange. But you know, but jaunty. So, so anyway, yeah.
I absolutely adore that. And it really just brings home that point, because so often when we're having conversations about storytelling and voice and character,
Yeah,
we're having this conversation with writers, right? And we're talking about our craft, but everyone can have a story. Everyone can be a great storyteller. It's not something for the wordsmiths. It's not something for the Shakespeares among us, Ricki. It's not something that someone has to say that I am a writer and this makes me this professional being that is other. I'll just leave it there.
right.
We all have something to share. We all have ideas, and so many people have that personality with the storytelling. So that's absolutely awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I want a picture of this thing.
I'm gonna try to find one. Yeah.
And Zach, I'm going to hop over to you with the same question. You said you had a really good storyteller in your life.
I do, actually. I also have a very persistent cat. But go away. But no, my father is the best storyteller that I have in the family. And though I'm not gonna try to recite any of his stories, because He certainly tells them with a flair. I cannot. What I gained from him was a certain style and storytelling ethic to it. You know, he has this way of being able to stand in front of people and draw attention, because he speaks. It's not loud, it's not soft. He just hits it just right, and he draws people in. And he would always tell these stories that would have very defined beginnings, middles, and ends, even though it's just some piece of a moment in his life. I know I remember him telling me one story about a motorcycle accident he had when he was 19. And the simplicity of it is that he got T-boned by a station wagon. If you don't know what that is, young people, look that up. He got T-boned by a station wagon and thrown over it in the air and blacked out in the middle of it and landed on the back of his head. And if he had not blacked out, the doctors say he would have died. Now that's the short of it, but he takes that thing and spins it into about a 10 to 15 minute tale where you're engrossed and you feel it, and you feel the fear and the anxiety and everything that goes along with it. And I always really appreciated that. And he could do that with just about anything. You know, one of his great friends passed away several years ago, and he was the one that got up there and told stories about him. And you know, you can take the mood of a room and transform it into something entirely different with the right story. And so I always gathered from that it was applicable to writing the story and being able to create that sense of empathy and draw the reader along with you. And then I'll leave one last thing. He also taught me about creating lives out of inanimate objects. Though I am not a hunter myself, he was, and he had this deer, and I do not remember the deer's name, but he always put it up wherever he was. It was right there on the wall, and he had a name for it, and he had a whole history for it. And anytime anybody asked about it, he would launch into this whole history of this deer in a way that kind of honored the deer's life, even if it wasn't the life of the deer. But I have to admit, I have an affinity for doing very much the same thing.
That's wonderful. Again, things that are passed down to us that are more than just the genes and all of that stuff. Just that ability to tell a good spin a good yarn, that ability to find those details, that energy in the storytelling, and that's a craft in itself. Thanks, Zach. And Vanessa, you already mentioned about how your family has inspired you in your writing. Now, why are sometimes the stories from your family so special to you and the ones that you're choosing to write?
Well, of course, with the inspiration that my grandson gave, I just felt, you know, really very impelled to write that story. And I grew up with my family members were a faith-based family, believing in God, and they ushered me into believing in God at an early age. And so therefore, it was very important for me to talk about faith in my books. And I must say that initially I had no thought of writing Christian books. I was going to write a romance novel. And but God spoke to me one day in the gym early one morning and said, "You are going to write Christian books." And I said, "Really? Really, God?" And then he said, "And they're going to be about children." And I definitely had shared with friends that I would not write for children. I did not want to write a children's book, but he said it would be a children's book. So I followed his lead and did what I was asked or told to do. But I do think stories from family members are often the most special to me because they ensure that other generations will learn about a family's history and heritage. Now, I will also admit that when I was younger, I was not a very inquisitive child, and possibly I wasn't a great listener either. So I don't have all of those memories that you all have of your family members, as far as the stories that they told. But as I get older, I realize how important it is, to be able to connect and to discover and identify yourself through these stories from your elders. And now I have a biological, well, they're not biological. I've been with them so long, they feel like they're my biological family, but this family adopted my children and I when about 30 plus years ago. And I love listening to their stories, and so much so that when I'm listening, I feel like I was growing up right there with them, like I was in the midst of them, and didn't know them until I was in my mid 30s. But as it relates to my own family, as I mentioned, I didn't get a lot of stories from them. And, like I said, if only I could turn back the hands of time, I would ask more questions, to find out about these stories. And even after my dad died, I did not even know that I had family that lived in the city where I live. I grew up in Atlanta, born and grew up in Atlanta. They came to the house after the funeral, well, before the funeral, and say, I'm your dad's cousin, your dad's first cousin. I say, you're who? And it was just a mystery to me. I mean, I did not know. I had met some cousins from out of state, but never knew I had cousins in state. So afterwards, I started going to their going to my family reunions with them, and the elders would speak, and it was so obvious that they were so wise and so revered, because everybody would just be on the edge of their seat, just listening in, trying to hear every word that they were speaking. And they called it the elder speak. And I was definitely on the edge because I had never heard any of these stories. And, people, they would talk about my great grandfather and my grandfather. And I'm like, wow, I never knew this. And I'd like to also add that pictures tell stories too. On one of the family reunions on the bus, I was sitting next to a cousin, and I looked over, he was going through pictures, and I looked over and I saw a picture of my great granddad. I do remember seeing a picture of my great granddad long years ago. I said, that's great granddad, and his name was listed there. And he said, really? I said, yes. And I tell you, it was just amazing for me. I felt so empowered. It made me proud, to actually be a part of this family. And then I must say, there are those family stories that are secrets. What can I say about those stories? Well, so at the end of 2019, I decided to get a DNA. I just only wanted to know my percentage of Indian blood. And unfortunately, it was 1%. And then a month ago, they sent me an update and said it was less than 1%. And I said, well, all right, so much for that. But in the midst of COVID-19, I got messages from people. I ignored them initially, but finally I decided to read their messages. And one of the message said, I think you're my half sister. I said, what? Your half sister? I don't have any biological brothers, And he said, well, our DNA matches by 100%. And I said, whoa, 100%, huh? And then the other guy was a nephew, and we matched by 99%. And it
World we live in.
yeah, that was something. And then the other part, the other real secret was that when I spoke to a woman that was working with my brother and my nephew, she said, I'm going to have to tell you this, but your dad is not your biological dad. And I said, what? My dad signed my birth certificate. He, he was there for me all of my life until he died. No, that can't be true. I just thought maybe dad was a Rolling Stone at first. I said, okay, I could accept that, but to tell me my dad wasn't my dad, And So I called a few cousins and I got their code names on the DNA or however they were listed. I put them in, they did not show up. I mean, I just kept trying to find anybody that shared a name, my surname, and they did not show up, nowhere to be found. So, I finally accepted it. I finally embraced it. Um, but I thought, you know what? Nobody can take my dad from me. He is my dad, no matter what anybody says. So, through it all, I have a brother. I have two brothers and a nephew and nieces and other family members that I've yet to meet, but we talk often. And I really feel so blessed to have found these family members. And I always said, I have a deceased sister as well, but on my mother's child. And I always said I wanted brothers, and then to be blessed with some brothers many, many years later, it's been really nice. And a nephew who is very endearing to me. And so what can I say about these stories? So I just say to everyone, just don't let these opportunities pass by, because these stories are so important. There's nothing we can do about those family members that are going to keep those secrets, because our grandparents and great grandparents, they could hold water, and there were some secrets that they were not going to tell no matter what. But if you can get the story out of someone, go ahead and get it out, and get it out of them, and record these stories. And that's why I really think Kris's book, I got it. I got your book. I think it is a great book to give you. It gives you prompts about her book. Prompts about writing these stories. And I'm going to use them too, because I have some stories that I need to tell and not, keep them inside. And then, as I mentioned, just to wrap it up, the faith stories that my parents and grandparents that they shared, it ushered me into knowing God. And so I want my children and grandchildren and other children around the world to know about God as well. So for that reason, I title the series of my book, that is, Families Growing in Faith. And that's what it's about, families learning about God and understanding God and knowing that more than anything, God loves us all. And just
I love that.
spreading the faith.
I love
Thank
that, Vanessa, for that. And it's so true, because I feel like family can mean so many things. And when we're talking about capturing our stories, to your point, they're the secrets of generations past, but there's also those moments of our own lives that you're just living your life. You aren't really thinking about it always, but that you do need to capture. And Bernette, I'm going to turn to you on this one. I know you have had moments in your own life that have inspired your own writing. And as Vanessa said, if you're looking for prompts on such thing, I have a great resource for you, whether it is generations past or whether it is, in fact, prompts asking you questions on your own life to rethink things. But Bernette, tell me about moments in your life that have done something to your creative process.
That's a,
A huge question, I know.
I know, the easiest question. I've had a varied existence, but I think everything colors life. So, and then life colors your creativity, and they feed into each other. I know some of my writing is, I write poetry, I write science fiction, inspiration, and self-help, spirituality, and now historical fiction. But I realized that one of the things that kind of grounds all of it is this idea that people have dreams, people have aspirations. We all come from one place and we're all trying to get somewhere else. And finding that thing within yourself, finding that source of power and strength, your own faith, what you call it, that allows you to do whatever it is you're trying to do. And that theme kind of weaves through everything. I was in South Carolina, Florence, South Carolina, summer before last for a family reunion. It was my first time going to this family reunion with this group, and it's one of the sons of Irvin James. So the book that's coming out on the 1st is the story of Irvin James, and it was his second to youngest son, Eli, who was my great grandfather. And so it was for those children's downline and descendants. And it was my first time ever going to this family reunion. And I didn't really know the story. And I got there and they start talking about my great grandfather, what he did. And we went to the land, and I was in awe. And I was in awe because in 1870, just a few years after slavery ended, he bought over 100 acres of land in South Carolina and created a whole community for freed Blacks. And it's documented, that part is documented. What isn't, because of the times, is what happens to that point. And I was out there and I'm walking around the cemetery, which is an active cemetery. And we are driving around the land and looking at some of the old houses. And it just came over to me, I have to tell this story. And kind of like to Vanessa's point, you hear God speak to you and you have to listen, or you just keep getting tapped. And so I didn't do anything for pretty much a year. And then kind of around the anniversary of that trip, it started hitting me again. I need to write this story. And I was like, I don't know the story. Nobody knows what happened, how he became Irvin James. Like, what did he do to get to that point, right? And I didn't know. But that's where being able to tap into spirit and really allow that to flow through me allowed me to write this book. And I wrote it in 5 weeks, which lets me know that the inspiration was pulling through. And so when you think about, that message, it's interesting because I wouldn't consider myself a religious person, but this book is a book of faith, if that makes sense, and trusting and knowing that the promises come through. And despite all the things that he went through as a representation of, a people of that time, Black people, all the things that they went through and the journeys, that there's still a promise, and that promise can still be made real. And so when I walked that land and I met my family and I saw their faces in real time, I said, all of these people are made possible because of him, and a community with over 300 freed Blacks working their own land and living in their own communities, in their own homes, which was different for the times because it was often sharecropping, where you owned nothing, you kept nothing besides what you were living on day to day. And so for him to do that, it sets up generations to come to have something more. And it said the world, and especially I felt like the world needed something like that in this day and age. A reminder that there's resilience and strength. And so I think that moment, being physically on that land that was, purchased, and, it took some stuff to be able to purchase land back then, because they just weren't selling it to Black people. So like the whole story of, we're here on that land in 2019. And I think, I was led to write it last year because it was 150 years in December that it happened. And so I felt like in honoring that legacy, I needed to tell the story, and I'm bringing it out, in February because it's Black History Month, and it is, obviously a pandemic, but I was like, what better time to put out a story about Black history than in February? So that was a long answer to your.
No, it's a fascinating answer. And I love, because each one of you took this in such completely different directions. And I think that's one of my favorite things about storytelling. Again, no matter who is telling the story, you can speak truth. And I want to get your opinions on this. This is my opinion. You can speak truth, no matter whether you're telling fiction or nonfiction or poetry or music or whatever you're writing. And I was wondering if someone could speak on that whole concept of truth. I don't know, Zach, what do you think? Is there validity to that point, that even if you are writing sci-fi on other planets, is there truth in such things? Not that that's
I'm supposed to make the joke here about how writing fiction is, a license to lie. So I guess maybe, but no, I mean, I think one of the great things about writing fiction, whether it be genre or otherwise, is being able to put in those bits of truth, and whether they're personal truths or spiritual truths or political truths or whatever they happen to be, they're inspired by life. They're inspired by our experiences. They're inspired by what we see. And so I always find, especially when I do write the fantasy, that it is great to be able to take, for me, it's always interpersonal or emotional truths that characters experience, and something that is relatable to you and me and just our daily lives. And I love being able to weave those into fantastic stories.
Thank you. And Ricki, you're a teacher among so many things, and there's the famous writing advice of write what you know. How does writing what you know how can that be flipped on its head to mean many different things? Does it mean that you only can write your own life story, or run with that wherever you would like?
Well, and I think that's a thing, because it's really something where there's a lot going on in the industry talking about, like, what are you allowed to write, and you can't know everybody's story, but can you include this and that? So I think, to Zach's point a little bit, when he said the emotional truths, I mean, yeah, I'm not a hobbit, so I'm not tall, but I'm not a hobbit, so I couldn't know how they're going to feel, but the humanity, like, you know what I mean? You could imagine with any kind of, and yes, of course, you can't tell everybody's story, you can't, but to make something true and authentic, just when you think of the characters, even if they're an alien, as being, having these human qualities, and how would the or being react. I don't think that answered your question at all exactly, but
if you saw my face, I think I either just lost you for a second there. So that was not an expression in response to your answer.
I'm sorry. But yeah, I mean, I'll use things that have happened to me, or things that, like I said, with this short story that I just wrote, it's something that didn't really happen to me, but like it could have gone that way. And that's maybe the more Hollywood version. Or sometimes you might want to say, well, what if things didn't happen this way? What if it was messier? How might I have reacted? How might these characters have reacted? So it's just fun to, we do have the license to play around with it. And even with historical fiction, I don't write historical fiction. I think it's awesome, though. I think it's so amazing because you can be creative. I mean, Bernette, you can be so creative and imagine, like, what must this person have been like, and what could they have done? I think we look at history and we hold people up and think, like, we see the pictures of them where they're sitting like this in black and white, and that's what we picture, but they were all people, and they, they had this, not the same exact experience as us, but we can definitely relate to them if we just kind of dig a little deeper.
Right. And Bernette and Vanessa, both of you were talking about kind of ancestry and all of these different things. We are in the beginning of a year. It seems like that might not be true. It seems like this year has already been here for a while. I don't know if that's just
21 days.
But technically we are still somehow in January. But how can we use all of these lessons from the past, the memories, the secrets, the stories, to help us go forward in our lives? I know it's that cliche thing, you have to know history so you don't repeat history. It's a cliche, but I wonder if someone could speak on what the past and our own personal past can teach us.
I'll kick it off. I know growing up for me, I always felt a little disconnected from my family because we lived so far away from most of them. And there wasn't a lot of storytelling. There wasn't a lot of chit chat in that way of just sitting around and telling stories. So when I got to experience it as an adult, one, you're more mature, and I was able to kind of really appreciate it, I think, in a way I might not have appreciated it if I was a kid and looking to do other things. But knowing what happened and even some of the things that I still don't know. Like I just found out, a cousin sent me something today because I'm putting the final touches on, and he made a comment, and I was like, wait, what's this? Like, what's the story around this other thing? So I'm waiting on the response because I didn't know something else. And it breeds this curiosity that
The rabbit holes of history.
yeah, and it's a rabbit hole. And if you allow yourself to be curious, one, not just about your own history, and I will say this because, and one of the things in my marketing of this book is, yes, it's Black history, it's Black American history, it's American history. And so it's not just a book that Black people are supposed to read because, it's a book that's about a time period in American history that was very real. It impacted everybody in this country in some way, whether directly or indirectly, whether they lived in the South or the North. There were laws and all kinds of things put into place because of an institution that they called the peculiar institution that was in the South. And so none of us have escaped it. And to understand that, and for me, reading and researching this, I was blown away at things that I just had never known. I mean, for example, there was a whole book in South Carolina, The Negro Law, like a whole book codifying, they talk about systemic racism. There's a whole book on laws directly targeting Negroes, Africans,
Right.
in South Carolina. I was like, they actually wrote a whole book about it. So, I mean, it's that kind of thing that as you're learning, you're like, aha, this explains this other thing. This
Right.
explains why Native Americans couldn't be considered white because they were too close in color to Blacks. And that's written in this book of like how they would classify. So it's all this stuff that you learn about. And when you start understanding it, you can put into that progression of when you take that system and you go forward, and you can see why we are in the position we are today. And so then how do you dismantle some of that? And this book is not about dismantling it. There's a lot of better educated, better learned people out there who are tackling some of those issues. But it's in that moment, someone surviving, someone choosing to survive and making that choice. And what can we learn from that is, in this moment, one, it's not as bad. We can still choose to survive. We can still choose to thrive. And we can still, decide that we're going to get to the other side and things will be better.
And that's what story can do.
Yeah. And that's what I hope that this does is he went through a lot of crap. But he came out and the promise was so real. And so you go through things, but at the end of your journey, have some vision set and keep working towards it.
And to what Ricki said, there's an emotional truth there that every single person can understand. There's a story there that is one man's story, but it's the American story. I mean, I love where you guys are taking this conversation. Now, Vanessa, for you, now when you're in the midst of thinking of, I have these stories that I want to share with my grandkids, what is it that you want to just make sure that you can use your voice to continue on for them, for your readers?
Well, I think just having an open mind to not be fearful of the stories. Just recently, maybe a couple of months, I revealed something to my daughter that I had been keeping from her for some years. And it was out of shame that I kept it from her. And I want to do better. And so I feel, and I shared this with her because I had my granddaughter was going through something similar. And I was giving my granddaughter advice. And then but she doesn't know what this secret was. But I felt like, I need to talk to my daughter. My son too, unfortunately, because of COVID-19, he's, we can stay in our households. And so, some of these stories you just don't want to say, get on the phone and say, hey, by the way, so you want them to be like, personal, up close and personal. So I'm really praying that soon we'll all be able to get together and I can, share these stories. And also because it is also important because we're running the risk of losing a generation of young people because they don't know our stories, they don't know our history, and so they're going to skip all over us and start making their own stories. And it's so interesting because I was reading a book, and I'm so sorry I can't think of the name of the book. I was reading it to write some questions for my Reading Bowl students. And the main character in the story was asking her mother, why haven't you told me this before? Whatever it was, why haven't you told me this? And the mother said, well, it wasn't because, your dad and I were trying to keep this information from you. It was just that, we just started moving on with our lives. And, it over time, it just became less important for us to share. And so oftentimes I think that is what families do. But we want our grandchildren and our great grandchildren and so forth. We want them to lean in, as I have done with my dad's family, and listen to our stories. And so we've got to do us elders like me got to do, now I am one of those elders, got to do a better job in ensuring that the generations to come will know my story and the stories of my parents and their parents and so forth.
Right. And I think that's so fascinating because you're right. We're all living our lives. We're all doing things. Things happen to us that are so impactful. They change the course of our entire existence. But then we keep going. We change the job. We do whatever we need to do. We soldier on through whatever that is. We lost Ricki, but I'm sure she'll come back. Yes, we'll soldier on. But we all need to capture those generational stories, but also our own. And I absolutely adore that. I'm sorry, Ricki, I'm not picking on you. Noises. But I think that's just so fascinating to me about this whole idea of where we are right now. And I love the tone of hope and inspiration that you all are speaking of, because stories can do so much and we all have them and we all should record them in whatever way that means to us, whether from past or our own. We should record them for our families to remember them. We should record them for historians to remember if one feels so inclined. I don't know if anyone ever reads historical fiction and realizes how much meticulous research goes into knowing the furniture's coloring or whether it has buttons or absolutely whatever it is. Record that moments of walking into a grocery store, realizing that the toilet paper aisle is empty. We have all lived through so many moments this year and in our lives. And I think that was the prompt of this entire project. Final words for everyone, because I know we're kind of getting to the wrap up of this. Final words. Let's see. What does family mean to you?
I'll start. Family to me isn't the family I was born into. It's the family that I create. And I feel like maybe I learned that as a writer, or maybe I learned that just as an individual living, but and it's not meant to take away from the family I was born into, but it is the connections that I have made throughout my life to the people who have remained most important to me over the years, that have shared the pains and the successes and so forth as I've moved through my life. And I will, sort of put the hat back on and say, if I didn't learn that before, I learned it through Broadleaf, because both the people who attend programs or speak at programs, or even most importantly, the people who work on the board or the conference committees that we have, or like Jessica Nettles over there working hard on the chat, these people have become a family that I depend on, and a family that I have grown with. And so it's always more important to me, and the stories that have evolved from that will be the ones that I tell.
Well said. Well said. Does anybody have anything to add? The meaning of family for you. You don't all have to answer this question, but I'm just wondering if anybody wanted to add anything. I think Zach hit a fabulous note there then. Thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourselves. I mean, because I realize I'm asking you guys big questions about life and history and the existence of America today, simple things, but I really sincerely appreciate everybody's time here. And before I turn it back over to Zach, thank you, Broadleaf, for hosting this. Go buy some books from these awesome authors here at FoxTale. Support your local indies, because you know who really knows the power of stories? Indie booksellers. They are keeping our literary communities alive, and we should support them because they support us and make us more empathetic people by what they give to us. So support them. And again, thank you all for having me in this event tonight. I've had fun. I don't see anything in the Q&A, so I'm going to throw it back on to Zach. But again, if people are looking for prompts for this kind of stuff, here's my final shout out. The Family Story Workbook is my third book, and it's a whole lot of fun of conversation starters at the dinner table, keeping your secrets under your mattress, wherever you want to go with it. Lock it in a safe or a time capsule so no one sees it for 50 years, wherever you want to go with it. But have fun and make it happen. Write it down. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will echo the thank you to FoxTale and to Gary for being a partner with this program, and definitely do support your local bookstores. Having grown up in that environment, it is vital, and the people who work there are passionate about books and know them better than anybody short of librarians that you will ever meet. So do support your local bookstores. Thank you, Bernette, Vanessa, Ricki, for joining us in this conversation. I look forward to working with you all again in the future. And Kris, you know I love you. So thank you for doing this program with us. I'm glad we could make it work. And for everybody that was here, thank you for your attendance. And to keep up with Broadleaf programs, you've got broadleafwriters.com. You've got us on Facebook, Instagram. We're on the tweeters, and you can keep up with our programs through our newsletter, which you can sign up for on the website. And we have a lot in store for this year, albeit on screen, not in person. And we're looking forward to a much better 2021 for everyone. So that's to you all. Happy reading.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.